You're watching GMT on BBC World News. Our top stories: a warning from US intelligence. North Korea may be building new intercontinental ballistic missiles despite better relations following the Trump-Kim summit. But there's more Trump diplomacy. The US president says he's ready now to meet Iran's leaders anytime and with no preconditions. We're also off to the Spanish resort of Benidorm, a favourite for British tourists, but will that all change post-Brexit? And in the programme, Aaron's here, of course, following the changed fortunes of BP.
Yeah, absolutely. David, just think about it. Some 8 years ago, the oil giant was rather, well, synonymous with disaster, of course, after the deadly Deepwater Horizon spill. But now, boy, oh boy, not only has BP's profits shot through the roof, but it's also splashing the cash in a big way in the United States. So stay with us, because we're going to take a look at what's in the pipeline for one of the UK's biggest companies.
Hello, welcome to GMT. I'm David Eads. So, is North Korea continuing to build intercontinental ballistic missiles? Well, that's the question being posed by US intelligence officials. They're reporting activity at a key North Korean site. Now, if the answer proves to be yes, well, that would be an embarrassing setback for President Trump, who, of course, held that historic meeting with Kim Jong-un in June and then went on to declare that North Korea was no longer a nuclear threat. Well, satellite photos of the Sanum-dong facility do appear to show two new buildings at the site, as well as vehicles moving around. What does all that amount to? Laura Bicker is our correspondent in Seoul and joins us now. Laura, in terms of what we have seen, what can you deduce?
Well, all we can see is that activity is continuing at these sites. Are they building missiles? Are they creating fuel for more missiles? That's something we don't know. But there appears to be a pattern here. This is the second time US officials have told US media that North Korea is continuing to build nuclear weapons and nuclear material. Also, we've spoken here at the BBC to the commercial satellite image analysts who've told us that they've seen those buildings, they've seen comings and goings both before the Singapore summit and afterwards. But when it comes to what we can deduce, all I can say is that activity is continuing. But, David, it's worth remembering, North Korea never promised to stop building weapons. The promise that Kim Jong-un made to Donald Trump in Singapore was that, one, he wouldn't test any further missiles, and two, he signed his name to that vague agreement, which is denuclearization of the Korean peninsula.
So that's the bottom line, isn't it, Laura? The inability, if you like, to judge point by specifics whether or not any action adheres to or breaks whatever that deal was.
When you have a deal that doesn't have any detail, that seems to have been an agreement between two men, then that is when the issue takes shape. Because right now we're not exactly sure what the United States wants North Korea to do. They know that denuclearization is the goal, that's their aim, but how they're going to do it, are North Korea going to let nuclear inspectors in? Are weapons ever going to be handed over? These are questions we don't know the answers to. When Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, visited Pyongyang just last month, there seemed to be an awkward meeting. Mike Pompeo obviously described it as productive, but the North Koreans said they were getting gangster-like demands from the US. There is a varying interpretation of what this deal means, both in the US and in North Korea, and that is where we're getting the issue.
OK, Laura, for now, thank you very much indeed for that. Of course, North Korea was very much enemy number one for the US for a long time, wasn't it, until Donald Trump moved things around. And perhaps that mantle switched to Iran. Just a week after Donald Trump lashed out at Tehran in a tweet, the US president has now said during a press conference he would meet Iran's leaders without preconditions. Now, that statement came just a matter of hours after Iran had said that talks with the US would be impossible under what it called the Trump administration's hostile policies. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes has this.
With the US due to impose new sanctions on Iran in just over a week's time, Donald Trump was asked at a news conference whether he'd be prepared to meet with President Rouhani and under what conditions.
I would certainly meet with Iran if they wanted to meet. I don't know that they're ready yet. They're having a hard time right now. But I ended the Iran deal. It was a ridiculous deal. I do believe that they will probably end up wanting to meet, and I'm ready to meet anytime they want to. And I don't do that from strength or from weakness. I think it's an appropriate thing to do.
9 days ago, President Trump took a more confrontational stance against Iran. In a tweet, he warned President Rouhani, "Never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer the consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before." It's becoming a familiar pattern. Donald Trump wages a war of words with a hostile foreign leader, and then he sits down with them to talk. He threatened Kim Jong-un with fire and fury over nuclear weapons before they met and apparently became good friends. Mr. Trump's offer to talk with President Rouhani appears to be another attempt to nurture a personal relationship with a foreign adversary. The US State Department regards Iran as the world's key sponsor of international terrorism.
The president wants to meet with folks to solve problems. If the Iranians demonstrate a commitment to make fundamental changes in how they treat their own people, reduce their malign behavior, can agree that it's worthwhile to enter in a nuclear agreement that actually prevents proliferation, then the president said he's prepared to sit down and have the conversation with them.
If such a meeting goes ahead, it will be the first between US and Iranian leaders in almost 40 years. Peter Bowes, BBC News.
It would be quite something, wouldn't it? I'm joined now by Rana Rahimpur from BBC Persian. No preconditions, says Mr. Trump, sort of out of the blue. What response have we seen so far?
So far, there hasn't been any significant responses. Only one of the advisors of President Rouhani, Hamid Abu Talebi, tweeted in which he said that the Iranian people have to be respected and the Americans have to come back to the Iran nuclear deal, which they left in May, for any deals to happen. So clearly he has set a few conditions, but he's just one of the advisors. There has been no reactions from the Supreme Leader or from the President himself.
Right, so they're hanging on to the nuclear deal, as you might expect, perhaps bolstered a little bit by the fact that European allies are also clinging on to that deal. Do you think also maybe if you look at what happened in North Korea, for example, and the way the Trump process works, they've been given a good picture as to how Mr. Trump does business?
Exactly, and the issue of trust has come up several times among Iranian politicians, and they said that they're unable to trust the United States. But at the same time, there are people and observers who think that perhaps something is happening behind closed doors. The reason for that is that in July, the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif went to Oman. Oman has historically had a role in mediating between Iran and the United States. Then, right now, the Omani Foreign Minister is in Washington and had a meeting with Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, yesterday. They said they didn't talk about Iran, but they talked about Yemen. And it's impossible to talk about Yemen and not talk about Iran. And it is in one of the conditions that the United States has set for Iran if there's going to be a deal. So many observers think that something is happening behind doors. Obviously, both sides are denying any of these suspicions, but it seems with all the movements, something is probably going on.
That is intriguing, isn't it? Now, our job is to clarify the world. I'm going to muddy the waters a little bit because we've got protests dotted around Iran today. These are about economic protests, about the sort of difficulties of day-to-day living in many ways. How does that feed into perhaps something on a much bigger platform?
It has created a lot of pressure, both for President Rouhani and the establishment in its entire establishment. So today we had received videos of protests in the Iranian city of Isfahan. Merchants are out there, they're chanting against inflation, rising prices, and they are simply worried about their future because the Iranian rial has lost its value over the last couple of weeks. And this is even before the sanctions have been reimposed. The sanctions were imposed this week. Before that, that. They can notice that they are becoming poor by day. There are calls for more protests. We still haven't been able to verify any other, but we're sure that in Isfahan there are protests, there's anti-riot police involved, but it's likely that we will witness more protests in other cities as well.
It's a very complicating picture, isn't it? Rana, for now, thanks very much. Thank you.
Pleasure.
To Zimbabwe now, where the opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, has said his party is winning the country's general election resoundingly and he's ready to form the next government. But the ZANU-PF party, which has ruled Zimbabwe for more than 40 years, has insisted that actually it is on track to retain power. Counting's underway, an official result expected within days, although from Harare, as Nomsa Maseko reports, there is sign that it could be sooner.
From the Electoral Commission, they are saying that they have not received any official complaints from any political party that took part in this election of any complaints about rigging or cheating. So as things stand, the Electoral Commission is telling us that it's all systems go and that counting of those results is actually underway, and now the verification process is also underway, and that they will start announcing results later on in the day.
Right, and as things stand, Messrs Chamisa and Mnangagwa are both ready to accept the result?
That's exactly what we have been told by the two main contenders of this election, that whoever loses will be ready to accept that result. But at the same time, Nelson Chamisa, a day before the election, said if any results that are not saying that his party has won, he will describe them as fictitious. And we saw the Electoral Commission actually reporting him to the police, saying that he had broken the electoral law, and also the Electoral Commission calling on police to take action against him, and that has not happened yet.
Nomsa Maseko there. Right, this is the last summer before the UK leaves the European Union, with many British tourists packing up to go on holiday in Europe now. Here's a question. What impact will Brexit have on their love of European travel? Well, one of the industries that might be affected by Brexit is aviation. How about the flights to and from EU destinations, for example, and across EU airspace? Here's our reality check correspondent Chris Morris presenting some of the options.
If the UK leaves the EU without any withdrawal agreement, EU rules and regulations will very abruptly stop applying to the UK after March 29th next year. So what does that mean in terms of planes being able to take off and land? Well, the UK would no longer be part of the EU's single aviation market, which is the basis for flights in and out of the country at the moment, not just to the EU itself, but to other countries with which the EU has a deal, such as the United States and Canada. In all, the EU governs UK aviation access to 44 other countries. Of course, you can always negotiate new agreements, but access would start at a pretty low level, and negotiations take time. That's why a sudden no-deal scenario is so alarming to the industry. The UK would no longer be governed by the regulations of the European Aviation Safety Agency, which deals with all sorts of things like maintenance and common standards. The UK Civil Aviation Authority could, in theory, take on all the same rules and hire lots of new staff to implement and oversee them, but it would also have to convince other international regulators to recognise it, another time-consuming process. And if you're following EU aviation rules, you basically have to accept a role for EU courts like the European Court of Justice as well, all of which makes it a very difficult time for airlines that are already selling tickets for flights after Brexit.
Right now we will continue to sell in the hope and belief that when a conclusion comes to the Brexit scenario, that, as I said, common sense prevails and people realise the need for intra-Europe travel. Biggest fear has to be at the 11th hour, 59th minute, if there is a complete cessation and breakdown and a shutdown of air travel between the UK and Europe. That is the ultimate worry.
Here's the problem. In other areas of the UK's trade relationship, if we leave with no deal, we fall back on the basic rules of the World Trade Organization. But in aviation, there is no fallback position. Either you have a deal or you don't. So if negotiations with the EU fail, and neither side wants that to happen, there would have to be a scramble for an interim solution to keep planes in the air. The most obvious one would be some kind of stopgap agreement to roll over current rules for a short time. But that would mean the UK's current commitments to the EU, such as legal and budget commitments, would have to continue as well. Extended membership in all but name. Now, it's worth emphasising again that it would be in no one's interest to ground aircraft. Everyone would be looking for a fix. But the suggestion that everything would automatically be fine for aviation in the event of no deal is hugely misleading. And this isn't about project fear, this is project complexity.
Always is, isn't it? Let's get into the sunshine. Adam Fleming joins us from Benidorm in Spain. Many Britons on their holidays there. Behind you, Adam, enjoying the moment, trying to forget about Brexit, I'm sure. But Chris is looking at issues of aviation, and that's big business in one sense. What are the worries? What are the problems for that lot behind you, if you like? Is it going to be harder to get there? Is it going to be more expensive?
Well, the truth is, people here are not massively worried about Brexit, whether they're tourists or people that provide services for tourists. Number one, they think there's going to be this transition or implementation period, which will go from Brexit Day in March next year until the end of 2020, which should mean that next summer is exactly the same as this summer, because nothing really will change. Second reason that they're not too worried is that there are so many people coming from the UK to Spain on holiday every year, millions and millions and millions of them. Everyone thinks it's in everyone's interest for there to be a good deal that allows that to continue. As a result, no one here is doing any planning for the talks collapsing and the UK leaving without a Brexit deal in March next year. Is that sunny optimism or head in the sand? I'll leave that for others to decide. In terms of the issues that people will be worrying about in the future, there's all that stuff about aviation. Will UK visitors need a visa, or will they get caught up in the EU's new travel authorisation scheme, where you have to register in advance and pay €7 on a website, like if you travel to the United States? What will happen to the European Health Insurance Card, which should be in every British person's wallet when they travel abroad, because it gives them free medical care in the EU as if they were using the health service back in the UK? Mobile phone roaming, which has been banned by the EU. Will that ban still be in place for British visitors after Brexit? No one really knows yet. And because we've been covering the Brexit talks for the last year, we all know they have focused on divorce-related issues, winding up the UK's membership, not about all these future issues. So for now, these are all still questions rather than answers.
OK, Adam, thank you very much indeed. Worth pointing out, we're getting a continental European summer here in the UK, so why go anywhere? Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come in GMT. A slam dunk for Africa. Could basketball overtake football as the continent's favourite sport? The party of the Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen has won a landslide victory in a general election. Now, his government's been pursuing rapid economic development, though some infrastructure projects have displaced thousands of people. The BBC's Na Pham has this report.
It used to be a thriving community. Now this is all that's left. The entire Sreko village and surrounding farmland, 2 square kilometers, has turned into a huge water world. Since November last year, when the floodgates of the Lower Sesam 2 Dam were closed, more than 60 indigenous families in this village were forced to abandon their homes. Cambodia's government has high hopes once the dam is fully operational. This is one belt, one road in reality, the huge Lower Sesam 2 hydroelectric power station that is becoming operational later this year. It is going to provide energy to the whole country of Cambodia as well as for export. In the provincial capital Stung Treng, local governor Mom Sarun gave us his only interview to Western media explaining China's investments. Tiang Sovan and his family had set up new homes just a few yards away from the edge of the new reservoir lake. They hope to stay as close as possible to their ancestral land. Latest we heard, the governor has agreed for them to stay there. Nafam, BBC News, Stung Treng province in northeast Cambodia.
Welcome back to GMT with me, David Eads. In China, dozens of parents have been protesting outside a government building in Beijing. Now, this is to do with a vaccine scandal that means that hundreds of thousands of children right across the country had been injected with faulty vaccines for diphtheria, tetanus and whooping cough. Well, joining me now is the BBC's Asia Pacific editor, Celia Hatton. Celia, just give us a sense of the scope of this sort of vaccine scandal, first of all.
Hundreds of thousands of infants have been injected with what are now declared to be substandard vaccines. It's really the tale of two companies. So the company that the government has reported on today is a state-owned company. And the government issued a very short 3-sentence report saying it was an accident. The company was using substandard faulty equipment that distributed the ingredients in the vaccines incorrectly. Don't worry about it. It's over. The company is back creating vaccines again. The other company, Changsheng, created about 250,000 substandard vaccines. That company has seen 18 arrests. It was found that they were falsifying records, and that company really has been shut down. Its chairwoman has been arrested. So they're facing a far different future at this time.
Well, double standard is what it feels like, but the parents won't sort of care who's providing it, and that's why they're out in the street. That's quite a bold move to make, though, isn't it? Get out and protest?
Absolutely. I mean, protesting in China really carries a very, very heavy cost. And so for parents to show up outside the Ministry of Health with signs saying, look, we know that these vaccines, you're saying they didn't really have any effect, they were simply substandard. We know that our children have been affected, and they're pointing to all sorts of health concerns in their children. It is a really striking thing to do in China at this time. I do know of one individual who protested in Beijing a couple of years ago when his child's kindergarten was shut down overnight, and he lost tens of thousands of dollars. He joined a small protest with some other parents. He lost his job. He was evicted from his home. He really was, ever since then he's found it hard to find employment.
Wow,
so
you have to really take it on if you're going to do
absolutely.
it. This whole thing about vaccines in any case, and making sure you've got safe ones. I mean, you've lived there, you've been through the process very briefly, not straightforward.
No, and when I had a child in China, I basically timed my holidays with her vaccination schedule to take her outside of China to get foreign vaccinations for her, and that's a really common thing, actually. And in fact, Chinese parents, we're seeing a spike in interest in taking children, Chinese babies, to Hong Kong, to the Chinese territory of Hong Kong, where you can get foreign vaccinations, but to other destinations, to the UK, to the United States, to get foreign vaccinations, because this is not the first time we've seen a vaccine scandal in China.
No. Celia, thanks very much indeed. Now, little doubt that basketball is becoming more and more popular in Africa. Part of the reason for that is that 2/3 of the players in the US National Basketball Association are African Americans. The NBA is capitalising on that by staging some exhibition games in Africa. BBC Sport Africa's Janine Anthony reports that the sport, though, has a long way to go to catch up with that other sport.
Basketball. Fast-paced, energetic, intense, and at times completely mesmerizing. It's becoming more popular across Africa, with young people taking to courts across the continent, hoping to reenact the moves they see the pros make.
Here in Nigeria, there's something of a renaissance. In 2012, the men's team qualified for the Olympic Games, and 3 years after, in 2015, they won the AfroBasket title, and that has led to the sport going from strength to strength. But they're not the only ones enjoying some success. The women's basketball team, also known as the Tigers, will represent Africa at the World Championship later this year in Spain.
Across the continent, the sport feels close to the culture of young urban Africa. There is also a growth in the number of those following the United States of America's NBA, a league which is 3/4 black and includes some of the best talent from Africa. It's held clinics for young kids across Africa and is about to hold a third NBA Africa game on Saturday in South Africa, involving NBA stars of African origin. It has also established an academy in Senegal. But what can we learn from the Americans?
Now we're providing the opportunity by starting with the younger generation so that we don't have to worry about in 5 to 10 years that they missed a chance to play the game of basketball. So now we're pouring back into our community, our respective countries, and the continent of Africa.
So can we possibly dream of the day when basketball overtakes football in the hearts of African sports fans?
As an ambassador of basketball and the game, I would say that yes, we will take over because our game doesn't ask so much space. It's only need a small place of the garage or the backyard and to put the hoop and you play basketball.
I'm not sure if it's ever really going to overtake soccer just because, you know, soccer has been around since forever and we love soccer. We love the Super Eagles. So I love the Super Eagles, but I think we can get to where we're neck and neck.
So it seems as if the stars could be aligning for basketball in Africa, but a lot of work still needs to be done. Adequate funding needs to be found for more infrastructure and, of course, player development. If all this can be harnessed, who knows, this might end up being the slam dunk that puts football into second place.
We shall see. Stay with GMT though, because I'm going to introduce you to the Runner's Heel, which is also about sport in Africa and aid in Africa. You're watching GMT.
Hello there. There's been a lot of rainfall across the northeast of India, parts of Bangladesh and Myanmar in the last few days. Significant flooding and also some fatalities. Now, the monsoonal rains remain in full swing across more northern and eastern parts of India, across into northern Bay of Bengal areas for the next few days. That warnings are in force for parts of Uttar Pradesh for some exceptionally heavy rain from Wednesday onwards. Now, southern, southeastern areas will continue to see plenty of dry weather, and these dry spots where we get some sunshine, nudging close to the high 30s Celsius, for example, in Chennai. Now, further north, it's a quieter story. A few showers and thunderstorms around in Hindu Kush and also close to Astana. Temperatures are rising again in Ashgabat with a top temperature of 41 degrees potentially on Wednesday afternoon. Quite breezy, but dry across Karachi, temperatures of 32 Celsius. There will be some cloud around across the Western Ghats, some thunderstorms here. So for Mumbai, variable cloud. The odd downpour couldn't be ruled out. The southeast largely dry of India, but then they have this torrential rain, central northern and northeastern India. So further downpours likely in Mumbai, certainly across Dhaka for the next 4 or 5 days. Islamabad and Colombo looking largely dry with variable cloud and some sunshine at times too. For Delhi, there could be the odd shower around, but also some drier weather, hot, dry and sunny in Tashkent.